So the Mega Millions, do you have this in Illinois?
We do. I was like, God, should I go buy a ticket so I can get my own swimming pool? Did I miss it?
I think you should buy a ticket so we can just retire.
God.
Me too.
Listen, if I won the Mega Millions, the first thing I would do would be to build my own pool. The second thing I would be...
By the way, everyone, the Mega Millions jackpot, which is already... It's Tuesday, so who knows? Maybe one of us won it.
Sure, that's how it works.
We neither of us have a ticket, but is $1.5 billion with a B dollars. So you could... This is your ticket to becoming a romance hero.
I would start my own romance publishing company. That's what I would do, Sarah.
That would be a very kind service to the world. You'd never hear from me again. So if this podcast is over next week,
we're paying
you know why.
Everybody back and we're gone. I would keep doing the podcast. Are you kidding? Amazing.
I would keep doing the podcast. You know what else I would do, Jen?
What?
I would say all the things I don't say on the podcast.
Sure, because now you work for, own our own publishing company. You get to say whatever you want. Whatever you want.
Anyway, so I was just, before we got on this morning to talk, I was reading an article about like the curse of the lottery, basically like what happens.
Sure.
Sure. Listen, we are told like, oh, all the people who win the lottery then like immediately have bad lives. I don't think that's exactly the case, but I think a lot of people who win the lottery, like, people crawl out of the woodwork and things are weird. One guy's brother hired a hitman.
What? That's like a movie called Fargo. Yeah. I've seen it.
And I was like, that feels like the start of a romance novel in some way. Like, I feel like we could do that. There are lottery romance novels. Our beloved Kate Claiborne wrote a series called Chance of a Lifetime that is just terrific. You should go read that right now for lottery excitement.
Lottery, yeah. That's like a really, I just want my own pool, Sarah. I'm sorry. I don't need $1.5 billion. I need like less.
No. You know what I would do? I would take like $100 million and I would make an octopus research facility that I could go play with the octopuses in.
Listen, I know capitalism is bad, but also it is fun to spend money you don't have. So,
it is. And that's not capitalism. It would be for research. People could other people could go look at octopuses.
Benefit, and I would play with octopus. Okay, here's like a fun one. Okay, what thing in your like neighborhood or in Brooklyn would you like throw a lot of money at to fix or like update or whatever?
That is a really good question.
So I'll tell you mine while you think about it. So I live on the south side, everybody by Hyde Park. And at 63rd Street Beach, which is in Jackson Park, there is this beautiful, really cool old like beach house. And most of it is like locked off. Like it must not be a safe structure anymore. And if I won $1.5 billion, I would go to Mayor Brandon Johnson and be like, I would like to pay to fix the 63rd Street Beach house. That's how I feel. Yeah.
Well, we live in the only district in New York City that has a Republican congressman, and I would like to change that. I just buy that seat.
Just buy that. Sure.
No, but for real, listen, this is going to be depressing, but right now we've got a serious, we have a lot of migrants in New York
same
City,
in Chicago.
And our mayor is a garbage person.
Our mayor is not, but it has still been a big influx, and I would love to help those people too. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think probably if I ended up with $1.5 billion, I would do a lot to help in that. I mean, there's also, listen, New York City has immense amounts of real estate that are just sitting empty in the wake of the pandemic and a housing crisis. And like those two things should not go together. So I don't know. I'd probably end up pretty poor at the end of winning $1.5 billion. But man, I would do a good job spending it. And I would be able to pet octopuses.
Yeah, well, see, there you go. And I'd be able to swim in my own pool. Those two are not the same, though. Maybe they could be like part of a fated mates natatorium. And like one side would be the octopus side and one side would be like Jen's swimming side.
Just for Jen, though. No one else is allowed.
No. I mean, other people could go, but then like when I would just have my own dedicated lane next to the main part of the pool and other people.
Oh, it would be like blocked off. You could put like a gold fence in or something. Well, this is a fun fairy tale to pretend that we are a part of.
What a nice transition, Sarah. I am so impressed. What are we doing today, Sarah?
To Fated Mates. I'm Sarah McLean. I read romance novels and I write them.
And I'm Jennifer Prokop, a romance reader and editor. And this week, we are welcoming a special guest.
Zoraida Córdova is with us this week, the author of Kiss the Girl, which is on shelves right now. So, welcome to Fated Mates, Zoraida Córdova. We are thrilled to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
I am so excited about this book. Zoraida and Adriana and I are about to do an event tomorrow night in Queens related to this book, and I'm so excited. Zoraida, you have a new book out. It's called Kiss the Girl.
Yes,
it's
ma'am.
Part of a fairy tale retelling series from Disney. And the series takes famous Disney fairy tale romances, modernizes them, makes them like mostly contemporary, takes out the magic, and then Zoraida's job is to leave the magic in. To make the magic
true
romantic.
Love. The magic is true
the
love.
Magic is
and
true
it
love.
Is so great. I love this book so much. It is a retelling of Little Mermaid.
And you're a big mermaid fan. So I want to hear, I want to hear the whole story. I want to hear how it came about. Because sometimes I would say too, often we just talk about like the books. But in this case, I think readers are going to be really interested to hear like the story of this series and how you became involved with it.
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny. I don't know if it's subterfuge or not, but I've loved The Little Mermaid my whole life. I tell people that this is how I learned how to speak English at a very young age because my grandmother sent the VHS to Ecuador when I was 3, and I watched it until it broke, and my dad had to rewind it and be like, youths will, Gen Alpha will never know what it's like to wait for a videotape to rewind fully.
Once upon a time, you guys, we had to wait.
Once upon a time. And so it was, I just imprinted on this story, this mermaid, this girl, and the prince, obviously. But how I became involved in the Meant to Be series, I had known about it, and I had asked around if I knew that there were 2 books already. A Cinderella retelling, and then the second one is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, by Jasmine Guillory, which I actually did my launch party with her in San Francisco.
Oh, fun!
And that was really great. And so I asked my agent. I knew that there were a couple other authors pitching for it, but it was sort of like loosey goosey. And so I told my agent, I was like, I have to pitch for it. I have the meet cute. I have the idea. I know exactly the story that I want to tell. Originally, I know some of the other pitches, and I was like, no, that's not going to work.
That's not right.
Not going to work.
That's not right.
It's not right. She has to be a singer, and
she has to be a singer.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, right? No truer sentence has literally ever been spoken.
And then, I called with the editor because my agent was like, you can't send them your pitch because technically Disney could own your pitch because it's in writing. So that's why writers never do a pitch via email.
These are
on the phone.
These are great tips, everybody.
And so they apparently loved it and signed me up, and I have another contract with the mouse.
So let's talk a little bit about this. Obviously, Ariel, who is your main character, the names are the same.
I decided to keep the names. I try to give them different names, and it just, like, she was going to be Thalia and he was going to be Enrique, and it just didn't work. And I was like, it just wasn't working for me. And so I switched. I kept the original names.
I am really, like, one of the things I am really fascinated by, especially when and you can say more, but I want to put a pin in this, is I'm really fascinated by when an author approaches a retelling. How do you decide what to keep and what, you know what I mean? I think that's such a really interesting, because sometimes we've had Kate Claiborne on to talk about retellings when she wrote Love at First, which is Romeo and Juliet, but it's a really light touch. It's more like an homage in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Right. And so I'm really interested in kind of how that feels.
So I have always been fascinated with fairy tales because fairy tales have been around for thousands and thousands of years. So I always find it. I'm a college dropout, so I only very like loosely studied a fairy tale class. Um, but I remember being sort of blown away by the idea of the original, right? Like when people
Yeah.
say the original Cinderella,
Right.
and they go to the French, or I don't even know, or what country, but German, I guess. But there are iterations of Cinderella that go back to Japan, to Greece, right? It's always a girl loses a shoe, and then something magical happens, and then she meets a king or a prince. And so for me, like, fairy tales are really about transformation, but they're also about transformation through magic, like a magical happening, but also about what the society is saying about women at the time and morals, right? So you have something like Little Red Riding Hood, which is by the same guy, I forget his last name, Perrault. I don't know his full name, it's very French, who wrote the Beauty and the Beast, right? And so he wrote the Little Red Riding Hood too. And in his version, the grandmother doesn't get eaten, she just gets murdered. And then like 100 years later, that's when we get the version of the grandmother getting her skin worn. and there's like a touch of cannibalism. But it's like about Little Red Riding Hood, like a peasant girl overcoming, versus like the first version was he was writing in the French court. So it's like, it's about a girl getting raped and how you should not be alone with random men. And the wolf is like a man, right? Like a symbol. So fairy tales changes as society changes. And so when I approach a retelling, for me, I want to keep the heart of the story, right? The Little Mermaid, a girl is unhappy where she is and wants to go somewhere else. But in order to go somewhere else, she needs to transform, physically. And so what does that look like in the century that we're in, the 21st century? In our century, in a 25-year-old, in this day and age, right? Like, what does that look like? And so because it's Disney, if I had written it without Disney, I might not have put in so many Easter eggs to the movie. But because it is Disney, I was encouraged more Easter eggs, like more cowbell.
Yeah, I would say that's probably like a big part of like the fun for this series is like seeing, right? Like you have permission from Disney, right?
Yeah. I, like Zoraida, grew up loving, like, The Little Mermaid was the Disney movie that I like imprinted on. And then I had just right before I read Kiss the Girl, I took my daughter to see the live action Little Mermaid. So I was very sort of aware of, all the little bits and pieces. Every time there was a moment in Zoraida's book that was a callback to the movie, I was like, oh, I get it. I see it. I do it. I could definitely see. But at the same time, like, there are some, problematic moments in The Little Mermaid. There are some things about The Little Mermaid that don't necessarily hold up in 2023. And I think one of the things that you've done so well is thread that needle. Like the Ursula character is really fascinating in the way she's not a sea witch. She's not a terrible person. She has a real storyline.
Yes.
And I love that. I love the way that King Triton is reimagined as, maybe a little bit more of a problem dude.
This week's episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by Melanie Harlow, author of Hideaway Heart.
We all know I love a rock star romance. Here we go.
Pixie Hart is a country music sensation, and all she wants is 2 weeks off from
She
the
deserves it,
paparazzi.
Sarah.
She does. Those screaming fans. She's probably got like that loud noise alert on her watch all the time. A lot's going on for poor Pixie. So she goes home as plain Jane Kelly Jo Sullivan, except Kelly Jo, listen, your plain Jane days are over. Everyone knows who you are. Your family won't let you go anywhere alone. And so she is stuck in a tiny cabin with a tall, dark, and bearded bodyguard. And there's only one bed.
Oh, I love it.
So Xander Buckley is extremely, extremely overbearing and very overprotective and extremely bossy and a former Navy SEAL. But
That's
he's
literally
also...
what they're paying him for, Sarah. He's just doing the job.
Exactly. And also, listen, this man is extraordinarily hot and chasing her all over the place, following her wherever she goes, telling her what to do all the time. And it's gonna be great.
I wonder what's going to happen between these two.
I'm guessing they're going to get together, Jen.
All signs point to yes. You can check out Hideaway Heart in print ebook or with your monthly subscription to Kindle Unlimited. If you love a bodyguard romance in a small town with only one bed where Kelly Jo / Pixie Hart is having none of it and tells him to go to the couch, you should check out Hideaway Heart. Thank you to Melanie Harlow for sponsoring this week's episode. So maybe at this point you could tell us the plot summary for everyone who's at home and has not read the book yet. Before we get into the King Triton.
Yeah. Kiss the Girl is about Ariel Del Mar, who is part of a pop star phenomenon called Siren 7. And the night of their retirement concert,
with all her sisters,
all 6 of her sisters, her father tells her, actually, you're not retiring, you're going solo. And she's worn a wig her whole life. So he's like, you're going to have a new color wig, a new personality, a new everything. And she sort of sacrifices herself so that her sisters can keep their retirement sabbatical years. But she has one moment of rebellion where she sneaks out of the penthouse, because always surrounded by fans. So she always has to sneak out.
Sure.
And so she sneaks out of her penthouse, as you do, and goes to Brooklyn to a concert. And at that moment, there's a young man named Eric Reyes, who's at the beginning of his search for stardom. And he's starting his, what's it called? His national tour, first ever tour. And they literally collide, which is my favorite type of meet cute, where they physically crash into each other.
Mm-hmm.
And she does it by saving his guitar from getting stolen by attenzione, pickpocket.
Yes.
And they have one of those magical fairy tale New York nights where they stay up till like literally the next dawn. And she ends up going on tour with him. So there's only one bus. But in order to go on tour, she makes a promise that she will not get with him.
Mm-hmm.
And he does.
Well, she promises his manager. His
manager. His name is Odelia Garcia.
Who is the Ursula figure.
The Ursula character.
She makes a deal.
She makes a deal. And he makes a deal too with his friends. But his is more of like a fun deal because he wants to get taken seriously by his buddies instead of being like a himbo.
You love a himbo.
Perfect.
Why do I know that about you?
do.
You love a himbo.
She does love a himbo. Because of the Zoe Castile
Because of the Zoe Castile.
That's why. I was
sex
like,
books.
You said himbo, and I was like, wait, I know something about you.
Wait, is it stripped?
Yes.
Stripped
right?
And hired. Flash is not. He's not a himbo. He's just like brooding. That is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. So that's something about me.
So, okay,
No judgment,
so this
me
episode is about it's about fairy tale retellings, and we're going to get into recommendations. But I also want to just talk about mermaids for a moment because this is not your first mermaid. Sort of.
No.
I mean, obviously, she's not a mermaid, but it's not your first mermaid. Could you talk a little bit about just mermaids in general and why? Why mermaids?
I think it was the Little Mermaid movie, and then there's something really magical, and I feel like if I get psychological about it, I feel like I've always been attracted to fairy tale supernatural creatures because they sort of straddle this in between world, like the TV show Buffy, right? Like all the magical creatures are a metaphor for like hormonal changes, but also having one personality at home and one personality with your friends and at school. And for me as like an immigrant kid, it was the closest thing to representation that I ever got, because there wasn't like actual human representation in a lot of TV shows. And so I think that I just like became like, it was like a new like a way of seeing the world through a different lens, which is what fantasy is to me, and that's why I love fantasy. But also mermaids. I read a book called Serena by Donna Jo Napoli, and it was a YA romance about a mermaid who saves a drowning sailor who after her sisters crashed their ship coming home from the Trojan War, and she heals him back to health, and they end up having sex, and I was like, but how?
But how?
And I was like 14, and I was like,
how?
But how? Like my limited knowledge of sex, right? Like, and so a fascination was born. And then I wrote my debut novel was called The Vicious Deep, which was I could write that now as an adult book.
You can
and keep the title. And
nice.
And that, which was about sort of like a continuation of The Little Mermaid. If like Ariel had moved to land, Brooklyn, had a son, and hid his parentage, and when he turns 17 or 16, he discovers he's a merman, and he has to go quest to become the next Sea King. And so I feel like I keep returning to mermaids. This past year or the last year, I wrote a lot of mermaid things. I was part of the Peculiar Taste Bonkers Romance Kickstarter. And so my short story, my novelette, because it's under a certain word count, so it's a novelette, is called The Captive Merman's Promise, which is loosely a Shape of Water kind of type of story, or Free Willy, really.
I was like, you said Free Willy on a romance podcast.
Willy.
Fine.
So if you want to know what Mermaid Anatomy is to me, you should read that novelette. It's under Zoe Castile with one L. And I describe the shape of his water, and
nice.
It's a good time.
Can I ask one more question before we talk maybe about some recommendations? Because one of the other things that's like, I think interesting just about the other ones you mentioned, right, is, so I've read a million Beauty and the Beast retellings and a million Cinderella retellings. And to me, those are like two fairy tales that are like bigger than Disney, like, right? And Disney is just like one of the kinds of versions of those stories. But like, to me, The Little Mermaid is Disney, even though I know it predates Disney. So do you feel, or is this like a story that you love so much that you've read other versions of it? Or are you really like a Disney Little Mermaid? Like, I don't know if that makes sense as a question. Like,
I do love that. I recently had to reread the Hans Christian Andersen version
okay.
for, I have an anthology coming out this year called Mermaids Never Drown, which is a companion to the first one, Vampires Never Get Old. And so it's an anthology YA of mermaid stories. And so I do a podcast with my co-editor, Natalie Parker. And we talked about the Hans Christian Andersen version, and it is just so different, right? Because fairy tales were never supposed to be really like happy, right? Fairy tales are dark, and fairy tales warn you about the world. They're different from fables and different from legends and different from myths, because they're sort of like this obscure time that could happen, and they're also very local. So like village to village, you could have a very different type of story. And so with the Hans Christian Andersen version, I think the only thing I kept in Kiss the Girl was the idea that when she takes off her shoes, it feels like she's walking on crushed glass, which was the Little Mermaid sort of bargain when she trades her fins for feet, and her tongue is literally cut out by the sea witch in order to it goes into the spell,
right?
It goes into the cauldron. So it's a lot more vicious. I think that like the Disneyfication of fairy tales makes it feel like fairy tales are about magic and whimsy and like all this good stuff, but like the origin of fairy tales is the opposite, is the literal opposite.
Yeah. When you have a story that has such different versions of it out there, right? Like, how do you like, or how do you decide what to incorporate?
I think that I look at how the story functions in the time period that I'm writing. So if I was writing a historical version of The Little Mermaid, I have to look at like not just like obviously Sarah, you're a historical writer, like you're looking at the modern women, you're telling a story to modern women about historical women, right? And you still manage to have these like wonderfully feminist and complex characters. So I think that that's something about when you're remixing or reinterpreting, because it's like a language, right? Like reinterpretation. You're translating elements of a story to fit the people, like the audience that you want to tell it to. And I'm my first audience always. So I pick the things that I like, and I you know, I know everybody feels different about it, and like it's not super academic, or like I just really like literary criticism. But like, you know, some people can just take the names, or just take a setting, or just take like one wish, and still call it a retelling, which is fine. You know, everybody, it's like everybody likes different things, but for me, I like to keep the theme and sort of like what makes this fairy tale different.
Do you think the popularity of fic has changed the way we think about retellings?
Oh, that's a good question.
I mean, somebody did say during my signing yesterday, it's like, oh my God, you got paid to write fan fiction. And I was like, sort of, and
not,
no,
right? Yeah.
Not, yeah, because I think that like, I actually have never read fan fiction. I'm sorry, so I don't really know.
Me neither.
Like,
I don't get it really. Yeah.
But I think that that's really interesting to me, right? Because that may be sort of in 2023, that might be the immediate response to this. But the reality is that fairy tales have been retold, like you said,
for thousands of years, right?
And so, and especially in romance. I mean, when I was looking to choose the books today, I mean, it feels like when you think about like Beauty and the Beast, right? I mean, we have all written a Beauty and the Beast retelling.
Yeah.
I have multiple times, like not necessarily even thinking about it, but these archetypes. And so I guess my question is about these, you know, when you come at the retelling of something like Little Mermaid, what are the archetypes that you come with? Like, what are obviously she has to be a singer, right? But that's not the whole. There is something very powerful about the loss and the gain in Little Mermaid, in the battle.
Yeah. The thing the archetype for Ariel that I wanted to keep was a sense of wander, like the act of wandering, because it takes a lot to, and again, it's like the immigrant metaphor for me, like it takes a lot to leave everything you've ever known to go somewhere else,
yeah,
where you don't know anyone, and you don't speak the language, and the language for her is like a new group of people. And so she has to have enough courage to do this on her own. And there's so many people who like just never leave their house, and they live with their families forever, and that is very Latin. Like that is what we do. But I think for her it's a big deal to leave everything. And I think that for Disney's The Little Mermaid, she also left the only world she's ever known to go somewhere strange, where it's, the human world is a mess. You should have listened to Sebastian.
Right.
And for Eric, his archetype is the dreamer, which is sort of like, for me, a type of hero that is looking elsewhere when like the thing that he needs is right in front of him.
I'm really interested in the way like the language of fic has overtaken something that I think has existed for a lot longer. Like, I don't know if that makes sense,
and
right?
I think you could call it that. Like, you could, like, no shade to anybody. Like, if you want to call it fan fiction, I guess you can. But it,
it just feels. It feels like older magic than that,
Yeah.
Do not quote the deep magic to me.
Right.
I was there when it was written, right? And that's how it feels. Like, this is not new. Like you and others who write retellings, who especially about fairy tales, who are negotiating the stories and the archetypes of fairy tales, are writing on millennia of storytelling. Like, it is a piece of a much longer.
And I look at every single one of my novels. I think about what is it in conversation with, right? So when I start looking at, like, my next novel is about angels, right? So I'm like, I have to look beyond the single mention of angels in the quote unquote Christian Bible,
right?
And like look at ancient Sumer and Babylonia and the Greeks,
right?
For the imagery of what we think of as angels. And so like I feel like I go back as far as I possibly can until I'm like, all right, well, I think I'm at the actual origin, because when we say like original, it's not always like, there's always going to be more.
This week's episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by Jess Bryant, author of Unbreakable Bond. And before Sarah launches into this, I want to tell everybody, I had an amazing interaction with someone who was like, I really don't even mind listening to commercials on your podcast. And I was like, yeah, that's because they're about romance novels.
We don't mind reading the commercials on our podcast because they're about romance novels.
I'm not trying to sell you like an air fryer or like a multi-gadget tool. I'm like, let me tell you about these romance novels.
Part of what I love the most about this is that I read these and then halfway through, I'm already clicking buy because, and this is a good example of how. So, Jess Bryant's Unbreakable Bond, Zoe Kent, our heroine, is a human, and she turned 18 and learned that the boy she loved her entire life is not ever going to be hers because he is a wolf shifter, and if they were intended to be fated mates, Jen, he would have smelled it on her.
Of course.
Which he didn't.
A well-known romance hero.
I mean, this is science. So, okay. So she realizes, like, she is wildly in love with this man. She's been in love with this man for her whole life, and she's going to have to watch him mate with another person. And it's not great for her. It's not great for poor Zoe, except Rafe Hudson enters the picture.
Michael's brother.
Is Michael's brother. And he is pretty scarred physically and mentally from an attack that left his parents and twin dead, and left his pack without an alpha. He was the alpha of the pack, Jen, and he just took off. So he's back because Michael and the pack are in danger, and he realizes, like, he has to come and do the right thing. But he rolls into town and instantly takes one whiff.
Gets downwind of Zoe, right? I mean, I could not love this more, right?
No. And boom, Zoe is his fated mate. She's like, what? There is no way. And these two.
I know, amazing.
Here's hoping it's a fast incendiary burn. I'm going to read the hell out of this.
So everybody, you can find Unbroken Bond, the first in a completed 5-book series with in print, ebook, and audio, and with your monthly subscription to Kindle Unlimited.
Thank you. Bites her?
I hope so. Thank you to Jess Bryant.
Promise of the premise. Happy birthday, Jess.
And thank you to Jess Bryant. We wish you a happy birthday, and thank you for sponsoring this week's episode of Faded Bates.
So let's do some recommending.
Okay.
Zoraida, we'll let you go first since you're a guest.
Awesome. I have a Cinderella.
Always a classic.
I'm sure you've...
Doesn't matter. Do it anyway.
But,
listen, we're for it.
If the Boot Fits by Rebecca Weatherspoon.
No, let's do it.
Yeah. So in and I've already forgotten the character names.
That's welcome to Faded Mates, everyone. No one knows the titles or the character names.
It really is like I keep like the sensation of like, oh my god, he's hot. And Amanda and Sam. And so if the Boot Fits is the second book in Rebecca's cowboy series that came out I think in 2020 or 2021. And it is loosely Cinderella, and so this is a version of Cinderella where you take the archetype, the trope of the secret identity and the evil stepmother, but instead of an evil stepmother, she's her boss, a la Devil Wears Prada. Right, so they have this codependent relationship, and they're both actors. So Amanda and Sam are actors. He wins an Oscar or big award for a movie that he's not very happy with. He comes from like a rancher type of family, and so it's about the two of them having like one night where she walks away with something that belongs to him. So instead of him taking her slipper, she takes his Oscar goodie bag and his award. So that's where sort of like the Cinderella aspect comes in, and of course the title, but it's sort of this idea of finding something that quite literally and emotionally fits as you're like. The thing about Cinderella is that like they don't actually get to know each other.
Right.
And you know, so like he just puts a slipper on and marries her. But in this version, they keep meeting unexpectedly through like actor friends, and she goes to his family's ranch, and there's like, learns his family's secrets and learns who he is as a person. So it's a sort of like unveiling of their not secret identities, but like the lies that they've sort of told, the frivolous lies, like they're not hurtful lies. But it is very stressful. But I think that Rebecca does something very well in her books, which is she keeps things like lower angst, so that they're resolved in a less like, if you don't like super stressful, angsty stuff like that, like it's, it's obviously HEA, but as they're sort of unveiling or revealing themselves to each other, they realize like they are the perfect fit for one another. And so, yeah, that's a Cinderella.
Perfect.
I love it. Jen, do you have a Cinderella retelling?
No.
Because I'm actually wondering if we can do this without repeating the originals. I mean, let's see. Let's see if we can do it.
Challenge accepted. I've got two. So neither is Cinderella.
I'm going to go next because I'm going to take Beauty and the Beast off the table quickly.
I mean,
oh my God.
Listen, I do not have a Beauty and the Beast, but I love Beauty and the Beast retellings. Like every time I'm like, yes, I will read that. Thank you.
Okay, so my pick is Brearley by Astrid Lindgren Gray. It's a male World War II era retelling of Beauty and the Beast. It's set in the 1940s in a big French castle that is, World War II is raging through France. And there is a parson in the country, and he stops and he picks one rose from the garden of this like magical castle that has this like lush gardens, and it's like the only place in the country that is it's sort of somehow protected from the ravages of war. The moment he does, he is collected by a beast, by the master of this house, and brought inside and kept in a cage. And he falls. This is the love story between this man, essentially Belle's father,
Right,
and the beast who has collected him. And there is a curse. The beast is a dragon. Dragon romance is very hot right now.
it is.
So here you go. And there is this very intense, emotional kind of love in a phone booth feel to this. As you all know, this is what I love about romances. I have a very particular affinity for love in a phone booth, and this is it, except it's love in a castle during a war.
You do love that one. I think you've mentioned it before.
I do. I love Astrid Glenn Grey. My favorite, as you all know, one of my very favorite romances is Honey Trap, which is
Right.
set in the 50s
Are
or early 60s.
Are all of that author's books World War II? I'm sorry. I'm just asking questions.
Well, Honey
now.
Trap is Cold War.
Same.
So later. Same.
Same energy. One
I
caused
mean,
the
a
other.
different
It's fine.
generation of people, but sure.
Okay.
I actually don't know. I haven't read them all. And now that I'm looking at she has a lot of books now that I have not caught up on.
See, this is like one of the nice things about like sort of like combing through the mental archives is there's so many authors. I'm like, oh, I love that book. And then you check them out and find they have new books and it's so exciting. Okay, so I am going to talk about West Side Love Story by Priscilla Oliveras. So this is actually, my mom loves West Side Story. This is really cute. She and her friends went to go see it at the movie theater the summer before 8th grade. And then she tells the story about how like that entire summer they just would like hang out in her basement and like be the Sharks and the Jets, and like they knew all the choreography and everything. Like,
when you're a jet
right?
all the way.
And I remember as a kid like kind of feeling like, my God, this movie lasts forever. But this summer, West Side Story was at the Lyric Opera in Chicago, and I saw it on like I was walking home from work and I saw like the ad on like the bus stop, and I like immediately texted my mom and was like, I've never seen West Side Story on stage. Like, what? And she said, me neither. So she came out and we saw it together. And it's just like, this is like one of those, I don't know. It's just, I really love West Side Story. I even love the Spielberg movie. Like, I'm fine with it. Even though that guy I just pretend didn't exist. But like Rita Moreno being like recast as Doc. I mean, like the whole thing I just think is really cool. So West Side Love Story is a retelling by Priscilla that is about essentially like two families, the Capuletas and the Monteros in, I think it's Texas, because they're dueling mariachi bands. And one of the reasons that this is also really cool to me is I briefly lived in Texas when I did Teach for America, and basically like was like a white girl from the North who knew nothing and was like, mariachi, what's this? So it was also just like sort of cool for me to like, I don't know, like be steeped in that world again. And so in this book, well, and the other thing that I think this book really captures that I don't think anybody does as well as Priscilla is like the power of family expectations, right? Like, so, I mean, a lot of romance, we've talked about this before, essentially like family is often on the periphery or there's like found family, but in Priscilla's books, it is your family of origin and like what they expect of you and what they want of you. And so this is actually like a great example of it. And so what happens is Mariana has been adopted and has like a ton of sisters, and they are part of a mariachi band. And I think that like that's a big part, even though she has like another job. I think she is a healthcare worker of some kind. She also is part of this all women mariachi group. And so what happens is Angelo is on the other hand, and essentially the plot, the dueling kind of, you know, Sharks and Jets feelings is because I think his parents and her parents were once in the same mariachi band and then like split up, and now they're founding their own like kind of, you know, different ones. So like, you know, like the bad blood comes from like the parents' generation. And so, you know, Angelo and Mariana like realize like they have this unexpected kiss. And then, of course, he realizes, oh no, she's a Capuletta. So if you really loved West Side Story like I do, or like a Romeo and, I mean, obviously West Side Story is itself a retelling of Romeo and Juliet, then I think this would be a really fun one for you to check out. I love it.
I love Priscilla's books. She's great.
I love Priscilla. She's fabulous.
This week's episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by Chloe Angel, author of Pas de Don't.
I love a romance about ballet. I don't know if you know that about me.
I did not know that about
As a kid, I had these like books about like YA romance in the ballet world that I was like obsessed with. And so I'm really excited about reading this. So Heather Hayes is our main character. She is a principal dancer. She has everything going for her. She has newly engaged to ballet royalty Jack Anderson, but everything comes crashing down once Jack gets caught cheating. And all of a sudden, she's like kind of swept up in this huge drama. And she is determined to really prove to the ballet world that she earned her place on her own merits, not because of like his nepotism. She's not a nepo baby. And so the only place that will take her is as the Australian National Ballet, as like a guest performer. And so there she meets Marcus Campbell, and he's also kind of down, right? He's had a really hard year. He is recovering from a terrible injury that he tore up his Achilles on stage. And, you know, his dad didn't get to see him perform before he passed. And so, like, these are two broken people, but they found an immediate mutual attraction together. But they cannot act on it because the ANB has a very strict no dating policy. And so even though they are, you know that they are perfect for each other, is it worth it to break the rules, especially when they are both already like so on the edge in the ballet
Yeah, they have
world?
so much to prove. I love it. Well, you can read Pas de Don't in print or in or if you order it from chicagoreviewpress.com and use the code FATED25, you'll get 25% off. Again, it's chicagoreviewpress.com/Pas de Don't. And use the code FATED25. As always, this link is in show notes. So just head over there and click. Thanks so much to Chloe Angel for sponsoring this week's episode. Jen, I'm just calling you on that's a little bit of a cheat. It's not a fairy tale, but I'll allow it.
I believe the topic was retellings. I did not get the fairy tale only. Well, maybe I should transition then to telling you about. So, listen, everybody. My favorite fairy tale is Rumpelstiltskin, but right? It's so good.
It's the best.
I have two that they're technically
Okay.
Oh, see, Zoraida's got a Rumpelstiltskin too.
Tell me, because so everybody, Wicked and the Wallflower is essentially a Rumpelstiltskin retelling.
I wrote a Rumpelstiltskin retelling. Yes.
I know that there's a couple that have come out. There's like one called Guilt, but I haven't read it yet.
That's a good name for a Rumpelstiltskin retelling.
Yeah. But there's actually one. Have you read Naomi Novik?
So this is the one I was going to ask you about because anyway, as preparation, I was like, I should see if there's any Rumpelstiltskin retellings. What am I doing? I would love these. And the only one I know is Wicked and the Wallflower. And then I came across, it's called Spinning Silver. And I've not read it, but I was like, I am about to buy it because it looks perfect for me.
It is very much like Naomi writes beautifully. Like the first book is called Uprooted, which is I was trying to figure out which one I should do. But Uprooted is a Beauty and the Beast, but he's a dragon because it's sort of a Eastern European fantasy kingdom. And these came out years ago. They're highly lauded. The thing about these books is that fantasy readers call them romance, and romance readers will call them fantasy with a touch.
Right.
Well, this is what we talked about in the last time you were on the podcast.
Yeah.
Right? Yes. It's incredibly difficult to find.
It's incredibly difficult. So this is not romantasy. It is like
Well,
a beautifully fleshed out world with a lot of world building, and then like the romance is a super slow burn. And I wish that there was more romance in these because I wanted to spend more time with the couple. But like I was really fascinated with in Spinning Silver. The twist is that the girl is Rumpelstiltskin, and she's a young Jewish woman, and so it is this like she really goes deep into the way that people treated Jewish communities in this during like the I mean now, but also
right.
in Europe in these time periods. And there's a fae race called the Stark, and so the Stark king basically kidnaps the woman named Mariam, who or I think it's Mariam or Miriam, but it's the spelling is different than what I'm used to. And kidnaps her and takes her to his fairy kingdom, which is an ice kingdom. And she basically has to convert things to gold and silver in his treasure trove. And so it's really beautifully written. They're so gorgeous. The audiobooks are great. And those are going to be
the
my
audiobooks are great. Okay. Yeah, this is, I mean, I've said it before. People keep saying romantasy is like the next big thing. And I'm just like, define it. And how do you make romance readers feel like it's enough romance and fantasy readers feel like it's not too much?
It's never enough fantasy. It's never enough fantasy, to be honest. I know Thea Guanzon, Hurricane Wars, that is romantasy. That book is coming out, I don't know, this year, I think.
I think, Zoraida, you are defining romantasy in the way that fantasy has defined romantasy for a long time. I think romance is very much right now attempting to co-opt that word.
Yeah.
And turn it into what seems like kind of light paranormal. Like,
yeah, I don't know. It continues to be a bit mysterious to me. I don't,
I mean, look, fantasy has so many umbrellas.
Yeah.
But like, to me, like I say fantasy, when I say fantasy, I mean like another world.
Right.
Right.
I know what you mean.
There better be a map, is what Zoraida says.
Yeah, there better be a map.
There better be a map.
And many a kingdoms.
And romance readers are like, there better be kissing.
Yeah.
Right? And I
want both.
Yeah.
I just I need the world, and I know Sarah, you're like, let me skip the first 2 chapters and get to it.
We're monsters. I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. There's this great TikTok that I should have actually sent to you, but I think I just sent to Jen, and it said something like, me reading a fantasy novel, and it was like, I'm in the realm of with my companions, Harfnafna and Jeff.
Same girl, same.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And I traded my Hufelgaffen for.
That is absolutely how I feel. Yeah. Absolutely how I feel about the whole thing.
But listen, we support you if you love it, and
we support you if you love it. I'm just saying I don't really. I feel this thing.
That's not.
I just don't feel like it exists.
We're never gonna help.
Oh, we're not going to get on even footing, I think. And I don't go on the TikToks because it terrifies me.
Yeah,
same.
Fair.
But like back to Naomi Novik, like Naomi, specifically Spinning Silver and Uprooted, they're both told in a sort of fairy tale like way.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's still accessible. Like it's not like Stardust by Neil Gaiman, which is very much like ye old wall, and like they talk a little strange in the beginning, even though it's my favorite Neil Gaiman book / movie.
Yeah, so that's one I was going to talk about. As a speculative, perhaps I will read it, and then I was like, "Ooh, Zoraida will tell me if I'll like it." So
I hope you like it. If you don't like it, I'll owe you a beer.
So wait, so Jen, do you have another rec?
No,
Zoraida, was that your rec, Spinning Silver?
Spinning Silver, yeah. I was
okay.
I was waiting because since you did Beauty and the Beast, I was going to do Uprooted, even though they're both by the same author.
Okay.
What about you,
Jen,
Sarah?
do you have another? Oh, all right. So, well, I mean, are you going to, pause. Are you going to do Goldilocks, Jen?
No, you go ahead.
Okay.
Mm-mm.
So I'm going to do Goldilocks,
Oh my
which,
gosh.
of course, in romance.
Is usually real dirty. Those three bears.
Listen, this is what people come to Fate of Mates for, Jennifer.
That give the people what they want. We know what romance is.
That's the only thing we know. We only know what romance is.
Our job is beach. Okay.
Our job is romance. Okay. So I feel like we just came off of an episode where we talked a lot about Sophie Jordan, but I'm going to talk about her again. She wrote a book. Oh crap! What's it called? Of course, it's called this. It's called In a Stranger's Bed.
Sure.
Ooh.
Oh, Zoraida, you'll love this. So, it's Scottish set, contemporary. The heroine has just come off divorced or not divorced. Her marriage has just fallen apart right before the wedding, and so she decides she's going to go on the honeymoon anyway. So she goes to Scotland on her honeymoon and decides that she's going to like just take the walks and like do the thing and hike and like be in Scotland by herself and like find herself and recenter herself. And she gets herself into a situation where there is like she's on like a drive and the tour bus stops and like everybody gets off and then it leaves and she is stuck and the water has come. There's been a big storm and the road has washed out, so she can't get herself like back to the main road to like hitchhike or whatever back to wherever, to Edinburgh, wherever she was.
In Scotland, yes.
There you go. So she is wet and she is lost, and so there is a cabin right there on a loch waiting for her.
Sure.
And she goes inside and there's no one there, but someone has made stew and there is a warm shower and a flannel shirt that she can just jump right into. And she is desperate. And she will, of course, apologize and send some money after she has used this cottage for just to dry off and like recenter herself. And then she falls asleep on the bed by accident. And in comes this very grumpy, very enormous, thick-eyed Scot.
I'm not mad about it.
And
I'm not mad about it either.
And it's a delight. And you can get it right now. It's a novella. And enjoy yourselves, ladies.
I love a novella. I love novella. So something about retellings that I didn't say before was like, we retell and retell stories like almost to get it right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But I made a note that somebody also did this back in their time period. Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm.
Mm-hmm.
They basically like wrote and rewrote their fairy tales until the books didn't get panned by their audiences.
How fascinating.
Yeah, even though it was like to preserve the German culture or whatever, but still they would republish and rewrite. So like there's no like one version of the Grimm fairy tales. We've amalgamated them, but and I think that like we're still doing that today. Like I feel like I think all writers have like a theme or a story that they're trying to retell all the time.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's core story, right?
Yeah.
It's funny that you say that because one of the other people who's on my list is Eloisa James, because she's sort of well known and historical as like she is constantly doing fairy tale retellings. And one of the core stories that I think Eloise comes back to all the time is The Ugly Duckling. This kind of like unattractive, absolutely. And this is not just Eloisa, like this is a classic romance trope, right? Like anytime someone, back to Barbie, right? Someone takes the glasses off of a hero takes the glasses off of a heroine and then is like, look at you, you're beautiful now, right?
You're beautiful all along.
You've been turned into a swan. So, one of what I love about her version, her like actual retelling of The Ugly Duckling, though, which is called The Ugly Duchess, of course, right there in the title, is that
the hero love is sort of, they've been best friends forever, and he has always been like, I love her. I love her. She is my best friend, but she is like not attractive, and like I'm not going to marry her. She's not for marrying. And then he marries her. He's sort of forced into marrying her for a dowry. They are both very young, and they have this book has what I think is one of the best bad sex scenes ever written
those
in
are
romance,
good, yeah.
because they are children. Like, and so I mean children. They're like in their 20s, and he's I think they are 20. And so like they're both virgins, and they've never done anything like this before, and so they fumble their way through it, and then his father kind of reveals that he's married her for her money, and she takes off. She's in the wind.
My favorite.
And she comes back. He goes off too, because he's like wrecked by it. He becomes a pirate. Listen, this is classic historical. He becomes a pirate, and pirates all over the place. And then she comes back, and she is like the most beautiful swan. And it like feeds into this mythology of like, we all just want to be seen for the beauty that we have.
Yeah.
Because we all have it. And it's the ugly duckling, I think we see over and over in romance.
Yeah.
And I think often writers don't even know they're writing that one.
Yeah, I think that's probably really true. And I think that like Cinderella, there's like seeds of that that are so pervasive through romance too, like the glow up, right? And I think I'm very interested in, I think that's why I'm interested in the retellings that are self-aware. Right? Like I know what I'm doing.
An overt one.
Yeah. And I'm really thinking, as Zoraida said, about like, what am I in conversation with, and what am I trying to say about right now? Right?
Yeah. I mean, it's intentionality,
Yes.
right? Like we write with intention, because these themes are important.
Yeah.
As you were talking earlier, Zoraida, I was thinking, and this is sort of like a half-baked idea, but you guys can help me figure out how to fully bake it. But it also feels something like fairy tales, which seems so often in their purest form, in sort of the German, the French, the long ago, the fairy tale from yore, always feels a little bit like women are put upon in that, right? Like it's like women struggle, or they're asleep the whole time, or they have no agency, or they're trapped in a tower, or whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
And it feels
somebody
like
has sex with her body and she pops out twins when she wakes up.
Exactly. Right. Or like there's the grandmother's skin is peeled off and worn, like these things. It's always the women who are getting the trauma and the torture in these books. And so when you said earlier, like, oh, they're cautionary tales, right? Like they're threatening. They're supposed to feel threatening. It makes sense that in some ways romance would be the genre, and fantasy would be the genre that takes these stories and reimagines them in a way that gives characters more agency. Like the character who might have the least power suddenly has so much more power. Because isn't that what the genre has been doing for so many years?
Now that Sarah's seen Barbie, one of the things that I like wanted to say about it and have been wanting to say is I'm fascinated by the way that so it's not just like you don't have agency, like can I reimagine a world where you can get it? But I think a lot of fairy tales are also about like what has been withheld from women. Right? Like, what is it you don't have access to? And one of the things that I really liked about Barbie that I had, the movie I've never thought of before, is how the world of Barbie cuts off women from their elders. Right? And so she sees an old woman for the first time. And then, the whole interaction with, the creator. And I thought a lot about how the patriarchy and demands to be beautiful are about saying you should never age, and that's something. But if you're never going to age and you can never see that, then that's also something you can't have access to, and then that's cutting you off from wisdom. So I think that's the other part that's really interesting about not just about a fairy tale is not just what aren't you allowed to do, but what aren't you even shown.
Right. I also think that you're very on point on that, because if you look at the iterations of the villain in the Disney versions, it's always a woman,
Mhm.
right? That is
Yeah.
A hag. Yeah.
causing harm, because what is the worst thing that could happen is like getting older.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or in the imagination of these people, and there's something to be defeated and fought.
It's like
as opposed to,
Tangled.
like yes, Mother Gothel, right?
Yeah.
And so in the original Little Mermaid, the Sea Witch is not evil. She presents a choice to the Little Mermaid. And the Little Mermaid then makes that choice and decides to go through with the spell, right? But
yeah.
she's not like tempting her. She doesn't turn into, like the Vanessa figure, which I also wanted to do justice to in Kiss the Girl, by not making her a villain.
Yeah.
And like that's something that Disney created to, again, like pit women against each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is the part that I hated the most in the new live action.
Oh, 1,000%. That live action I have a lot of feelings about, which we can talk about not on the
We can talk
pod.
about it tomorrow.
The biggest one is fish already look weird and cool. You don't have to make them CGI.
Yeah. I feel like Flounder looks like a fleshlight, and it just is so
In
unfortunate.
every scene under the sea, I was like, what is happening?
Ooh, well, I don't know where we go from Flounder looks like a fleshlight. Like, let's wrap it up, everybody.
I apologize,
No, never apologize.
everyone.
There are so many other fairy tale retellings that are truly filthy, but that will be for another episode. And maybe in private for Zoraida, I'll give you a list.
Well, and I think that's like a really interesting other conversation.
Sure.
Like, right, that is, we didn't even have to like really get into here. Like, what does it mean to dirty up one?
This book is closed door, Kiss the Girl. But I wanted to put, it's still very piney.
But so sexy, and like these two are so horny for each other. So
They are so horny. And so like I like Disney actually didn't get some of like the horny moments that I left in.
fine.
And like I
That
feel like
feels right.
romance readers will get it. But I did have somebody be like, I don't understand why there's no sex, drugs, and rock and roll in this book about musicians. And I was like, it's a
Disney book. Yeah, it's a Disney book.
Listen, it's so romantic. I read it on the beach, and it was such a joy, and I loved every page of it.
Thank you. It is the most romantic book I've ever written.
And all I want is for 6 more of these books. I want every other sister to get that story. And so if Disney won't do it, Zoraida, maybe you could just like write another series about 6
just change the name.
sisters.
Yes, there you go.
Who are like in like some other kind of club. Like I don't know what. Podcasters.
Sure, there you go.
This was so great. Zoraida, the book is Kiss the Girl. Congratulations. It is out now in stores. You can find it wherever you get your books. Zoraida, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Zoraida Solo. And that's it. And my website, ZoraidaCórdova.com.
This is Fated Mates. You can find us at fatedmates.net. You can find us online on Twitter at Fated Mates, on Instagram at Fated Mates Pod, on Threads, but we don't use it very well. So, one day we'll get there when Jen decides she's making the jump. And if you just can't get enough of us and you want more time and more of us in your ear holes, you can join our Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/fatedmates. Thanks for listening, everyone.